Welcome back, everybody. Right now, Ukraine has just launched a significant strike on the outskirts of St Petersburg in Russia, just before the opening of the worldly known International Economic Forum, one of the most important for sort of legitimizing Putin as a world actor and the importance of Russia as an economic hub as well. Now, this is a big deal because it's striking right at the heart of Russia's not just economic, but cultural and historical center as well. And there's been reports of it striking parts of Putin's hometown. There were around 60 drones that were shot overnight. So this is a big deal because Ukraine is showing more and more confidence in its willingness to take the fight to not just the border with Russia, but deeper within Russia, not just rural areas, but, as I say, the urban and symbolic heartlands of the country. Now, very important part of this is Ukraine's ability to do it with the support of largely Europe now. The Europeans have taken up the mantle almost entirely. There's nothing that really comes from the US anymore. So to understand how this all weaves in, I'm delighted to be joined by Nicholas Juan, who is a defense and security analyst at the RAND Corporation. He works primarily within the areas of European defense and regional geopolitics. But given the timeliness of what's been happening in the past 24 hours, I thought it'd be very interesting to understand Nicholas's take. And then we're going to dive deeper into French security architecture. Could the British and the French provide security assurances in response to the US withdrawal, the threats of reallocating troops? All that to come. But Nicholas, welcome to the program. As I said in the intro there, just what's your immediate reaction to this news that's happened in the past 24 hours?
Well, so obviously we see that the conflict is going on and that it's not going away. It's not going away for the Transatlantic Alliance. It's not going away for Europe, for the European Union and for European countries. So this is going on with, in the background, the sort of like grand redefinition of European geopolitics and European defense vis-a-vis the US, but more generally vis-a-vis the world. Like, how is Europe seeing itself in the world? What kind of position does it want to have? What kind of pooling and sharing are they ready to put together in order to face it? And I do think that we're seeing like a longer term trends that will really redefine the geopolitics of this part of the world.
No, certainly. When we see the Ukrainians carrying out such a strike on St. Petersburg, like, what does that tell us about the confidence that they have? Is this because of the support that Europe has been providing them?
Well, that's a good point. There was certainly an effort from Europe to keep supplying Ukraine in ammunition and other resources to keep the fight going. And so we saw like the European defense chief, the chief of the European Defense Union, Defense Commission, at the Commission, and saying that Europe really needs to, like pursue the effort to increase it, actually, to be able to supply ammunition to Ukraine. So this is something that will stay. Obviously, there are still like some challenges, obviously, because you have like multiple layers. I would put it this way: multiple layers of challenges. What we see is that at the European Union level, at the pan-European level, there is definitely a willingness to sort of like, increase the tempo of ammunition supply, of increasing the help to Ukraine, and this is going on. Where we see more challenges is probably at the national level sometimes. And it's not necessarily about the political will in the sense of like, I think there is like the helping Ukraine is consensual enough to do things at the European level. You have enough countries that are willing to do this, but it's more like countries having to deal with their own sort of like strategic alignment or lack thereof, their ability to mobilize resources to rebuild their own military forces, which is a challenge in many countries in Europe, including in France or the UK or Germany, while at the same time using those resources to help Ukraine. And I do think that it's at this sort of national level that we see the biggest clouds on the horizons potentially, because there was a lot of pledges over the past few years, lots of like promises, lots of financial commitments, but in practice there is a lot of ground to cover because of what was lost over the past decades, in terms of capabilities, in terms of readiness. And also, we can see some persistent inability to work at the sort of like bilateral, trilateral, minilateral level with those countries. So yeah, that's how I would put it. It's encouraging to see the European Union being so willing to help Ukraine. Now we are going to have to look at the national level as well.
Well, yeah, I was going to just interject on that because overnight Russia's fired 73 missiles, 656 drones, and Zelensky has been publicly begging for Patriot ammunition right now, but throughout the conflict, from the times I've been there, I've seen just how important sustainment of stockpiled munitions is. So why is Ukraine still running out of these things? And is that because of the Europeans unable yet to supply the stopgap or whatever, fill the deficit that has been left by the US discontinuing its supply?
Scale is a big challenge at the moment for the European defense industry and for all the defense industry, to be honest, but let's focus on the European defense industry. It's a defense industry that has been used for decades at this point to produce at low quantities exquisite systems, like of missiles and other systems and platforms. And now we are speaking about like high intensity warfare with a high level of attrition, high levels of use of like basic systems such as like very cheap drones or ammunition, old-fashioned shells. It's not only about mobilizing the money to produce those, which is challenging enough. It's also to have like the production lines ready to do it. And despite the pledges, and despite the strategic willingness, I would say, that has been demonstrated, I mean, behind that you have very real companies with real people and assembly lines, such as Nammo, Rheinmetall, and others, that need to increase production, not only to supply national needs, because they are high enough already, with stocks depleted and things like this, and also supply Ukraine. And it's just a long process. It requires funding in order, upfront building, like training people, building factories, and then a sustained financing. So like every year you would have like national governments pledging money to keep the assembly line going, and this isn't easier said than done, to put in simply, because first of all, well, this is a complex thing to coordinate between industry and the government. Second of all, governments are faced with lots of like financial pressure at the moment, for multiple reasons. But like Western European countries, as we know, are facing like high levels of debts and deficits. And as we speak, for those countries, you have debates in parliaments and like national assemblies to unlock money for those things. But it's going to be money put it into this against other missions that the state usually does and that the public and the voters expect. So yeah, sorry, I went back the chain of events here, but the thing is, like, it is quite complex to keep that going.
Well, Nicholas, if I can just ask, isn't it time that the European states cut welfare? One of the biggest issues, I think, a lot of people frustrations is that defense security has been neglected for the best part of 35 years, my entire lifetime, since the end of the Cold War. And some nations, particularly some Mediterranean ones, have been very emphasis on free riding. Right. One of the things I think some people agree with or appreciate from Trump is the willingness to call out European states for free riding, free loading off the US. And this is part of the problem now, right? We've got this this delay between needing to get with the times of defending ourselves, but we've been too negligent. about it. Would you agree with that? I think that's a bit of a harsh assessment.
This is an eminently political debate. I mean, my individual voice for this, I'm just a voter like anyone else. I can have my opinion, but essentially, what I would like to point out is the fact that trade-offs are everywhere. It is something to sell politically to your voting base if you are a political leader. So what we are facing now is obviously the fact that those political leaders have potentially issues to sell those kind of increase in order, to secure a front line that is sometimes, thousands of kilometers away. Politically can be a bit difficult to sell like some of those reforms that would be necessary and spending that would have to be cut elsewhere. From populations that, generally speaking, feel probably a bit struggling at the moment to begin with. So it's not about saying who is right or who is wrong. It's about the choices that should be made in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish. What is certain is that it's starting to be hard to sort of like how can I formulate this? I think it's starting to be hard to reconcile these strategic aspirations of some of those countries against the level, the means, and the level of funding that they benefit. So for instance, countries like France or the UK have very, elevated aspirations in terms of the role they want to play in the world, in terms of where they want to project, like force and strength, and the kind of relations they want to have with other parts of the world. And when you put that in perspective with their defense budget, the situation of their armed forces, their readiness, their capabilities, it's becoming harder and harder to justify. So sort of like to go a third way a bit in your question, I would say that those countries might need to rethink a bit their strategic priorities, because it's possible to maybe start with to use better what they already have and to focus it where they should.
Well, to double down on this a little bit, just to push back slightly, and Nicholas, if I may, but like, is it just a case of laziness? It's complacency. It's double standards. I think the French are actually one of the few countries, Macron, whether you like him as an individual, he, I think, has been the one taking the initiative in saying we need strategic autonomy. Europe needs to be doing more for itself, right? He's been saying this since 2017 in the one office for the first time. So isn't it right to be like, okay, it's time to call out the European nations which are particularly egregious of this? The Poles are leading the way with standing out for their own defense budget, leading the sub-regional security of the Eastern Europeans with the Swedes, the Finns, the Baltics, and Romanians, and so on. So, shouldn't we be calling people out? And we need to talk about the uncomfortable truth here. You're on mute. I think. I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me? No, still not.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Okay. No, please go back to what you're saying.
Nothing changed.
No, you're fine now. So no.
This has. So when you say the tough choices and calling them out, do you mean specifically about investment, about spending that needs to go up?
Well, it's about recognizing that Europe has been for too long criticizing this or not acknowledging that the French and the British have their aspirations to call it, but they are. I think the French are at least one of the few countries which is trying to follow through on those aspirations. Okay, inconsistently or whatever. But there are some countries which are calling for aspirational shifts, but they're not doing anything to contribute towards that.
So, in terms of mobilizing resources, I think that this fight has been won probably already by those who were proponents of higher spendings and Europe stopping to freeload, as you say, to use the terminology, because we have seen commitments for higher defense spending. The remaining issues is that we still have, so in the case of the EU 27 countries with 27 different strategies and sets of priorities. And obviously, if you add to this the UK, Norway, potentially Turkey, you have countries with quite different, going in different directions. So it's not only about the amount of money that is being spent. It's about like how to what level is the strategy that this money is spent to accomplish coordinated. There is probably still like lots to do at this level, and you are using the example of France and President Macron kind of fighting to get a more European strategic autonomy and a sort of like a stronger Europe. I think it's something that is going around as well. We have seen with Ursula von der Leyen, like putting forward the plan for European defense union, sort of as it's dubbed, with multiple, like pooling and sharing plans, the acquisition projects, the Rearm Europe plan as well, which is about like giving loans to countries that want to rearm. So we have seen like multiple initiatives like this going in this direction. It's generally speaking going in the right direction, I would say. We however, probably still need to look at how the countries at the cutting edge of this effort, who have like the biggest defense industries, the biggest defense spending, so nominally Germany, France, the UK, how can they work together to really speak with like, maybe not one voice, but at least like speak as a chorus, I'll speak like in sort of like in sync on those things, and define strategic priorities. For instance, if so the eastern flank needs to be securitized, like spend money in coordination with the countries that are situated there, with like Poland or the Baltics, to help them increase their air defense capabilities, anti-drone capabilities, things like this. If you consider that the Arctic is your northern flank, invest in capabilities, invest in systems and platforms that are able to operate there, become truly autonomous in securing your borders, essentially, as a bloc. It's not, things are being done at this level. I'm not saying we're starting from zero, but there's probably still some efforts to make, I would say, yes. Oh, I can't hear you now.
I'm on mute because we had some noise in the background. But do you think that there's some political appetite there? Is there genuine political capital sufficient enough to follow through on this? Because what I'm hearing often is pledges and commitments and summits, but I'm not seeing enough action. Now, some people think that I'm a bit heavily critical, but I was not impressed when Romania was struck by the drone on Friday last week. What we got was a lot of words of reassurance and condemnation. But when is NATO going to be willing to take the risk or necessary step in the eyes of some, to just, for example, shoot down Russian assets if they enter Russian airspace? The Turkish did this about 10 years ago with that jet, and the Russians didn't really do anything, and Turkey's a NATO member. So when do you think we're actually going to see a sustained follow-through of action alongside words?
Well, that's what this is what is hoped with this sort of European Defense Union that is crystallizing right now politically, and the European Air Shield and other initiatives like this. This idea that the European Union and an extended European Union, potentially with the UK, with Norway, would pool and share resources to develop a truly European, air defense system where it needs to be. Romania potentially, among other countries. So this is something that I see a potential in the medium term to develop and to exist. So yeah, that's something that I see probably coming. There is, like you mentioned, political will. I do think there is a political will. There is certainly one at the European Union level. There is one at the top level of many of those, countries, like especially the one that matter in defense, like again Germany, Poland, France, UK, and others, where it starts to still be frustratingly difficult is about, like the more pork barrel politics, maybe, as we would say in the US, when you start looking at like, okay, let's develop weapon systems together and defense systems together that would be necessary for us to be, like autonomous and in the future, and to be able to defend ourselves. New, like aircraft systems, drones, missiles. And we saw with the FCAS, for instance, between France and Germany, that there were disputes on like the ownership of the design and who is going to be the lead actually for the delivery. So between European Airbus and the French Dassault, and you see like those things still derail European projects that would be very necessary in order to have like a truly kind of autonomous and independent and efficient European defense industry. So, and again, like I could also go back to more like to other examples like ammunitions, where it's been difficult to coordinate the acquisition of ammunitions. So for Ukraine, but also because countries that are investing again in those assembly lines, in those companies, in those businesses, able to deliver those ammunitions, they want to replenish their own stocks before everything else. And sometimes it still comes in the way of those grand aspirations that we still see lots of declarations and political will at the top level.
So I want to come to France and say the French nuclear umbrella, some of the strategic commitments that Macron has made towards the European Union as a collective in the past year or so. But before doing that, I just want to get one quick take of yours, which is simply that, what's your opinion on the extent to which that the European Union needs to balance its own interests versus the interests of the Ukrainians? Now, you may well say that they're one and the same. A lot of people would argue that. But, I do see it slightly differently in that there is a balance here. The Europeans need to be cognizant of ensuring the protection and sustainment of the European Union as a project versus not diluting their own defenses too much because they're giving so much to Ukraine. And we've seen this happen because of the way that Putin has put pressure on the Baltics. He's put pressure on Romania. He's put pressure on Denmark, Germany. I think France was hit, or at least there were cyber interferences, right? So the point is, like, how do we balance that? And do you think there's an optimal strategy there?
When you look at the GDP and resources of the European Union as a bloc, it's hard to defend the idea that Europe cannot spare enough to support a country like Ukraine, that is at its border, and is a country that the view is that a stable, peaceful, and independent Ukraine is what European security needs and wishes. Therefore, balancing, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's more that Europe, in order to showcase credible deterrence and to showcase strategic autonomy, should definitely be able to support Ukraine in the way it aspires to. I think it's hard to deny this. But then it's what we said earlier about like the inherent difficulty sometimes to coordinate 27 different countries and also like third parties like the UK or Norway.
But do you not? But yes, it's possible to do both, but I mean, the European has a lot of money, but it's not free of a lot of issues. I mean, a lot of countries are running massive deficits. We've got a huge amount of, that's why I think a lot of people support cutting welfare in a lot of different nations, right? Is it as simple just to say because the macro collective budget of the EU is so big that therefore individual countries have that surplus to give away?
Well, it's back to what you said earlier. It's about difficult choices. It's about what we want to accomplish as a collective and within our societies. I mean, obviously, like it's not really a matter of like agreeing or disagreeing with one direction or the other. It's literally about what you want. And I don't think it will be possible to have a strategically autonomous Europe without putting the money into it and doing the coordination effort to achieve it, right? It's just, I do agree that those are difficult political choices. And there is the geographical component as well. It's quite easy. The further east you go, the more uncontroversial those opinions are. And, like, not like the least challenged the notion that the security of Ukraine and the defense of the territory is important, versus the more west you go and the more like the populations still seem to think about this as a sort of like secondary or third level issue compared to others, which could be like social welfare or things like this. So it's not like, I mean, we're all humans. We understand where those things could be coming from, but it's the work of the political leaders to sell this as a collective vision, if it's what they want to achieve. That's my view on it.
No, I appreciate that. I just worry here in the UK, we've got major budgetary issues. People are worried about cost of living. There's inflationary pressure sustained because of the war in Iran and energy costs. And so can we arguably justify that divulging more money towards another issue is within their interests, right? It's this sort of thing that is very difficult to figure out. So I'm very just curious, as someone who focuses on defense and security issues from that collective perspective, what your thoughts are. But if we just turn it to France quickly then, Macron has made a lot of statements, commitments, pledges towards improving the strategic clarity of France and its relationship with Germany, especially the provision of a nuclear umbrella. And I think there's been a recent development around that in the past couple of weeks. I think there's been a growing sort of way that maybe, I think it was Sweden or was it Denmark that would take them up on that offer. So explain to me a little bit how that would work and would it work?
So is what was dubbed the forward deterrence concept from France. So I think there are a few caveats to bring when we think about this, especially if we compare it to the extended deterrence, right? And the from the US and the nuclear umbrella of the US. Nevertheless, it's hard to overstate how much of a revolution it is for France, because the French concept, nuclear doctrine, is eminently it's a tool of sovereignty. First and foremost, it is the ultimate recourse in case the country was threatened. France has spent, that's the proof that sometimes a country can make sacrifices elsewhere in order to preserve something it deems, non-negotiable, strategically speaking. But France has spent so much money over the years, over the decades, to maintain a pretty remarkably fully independent nuclear deterrence system. So the idea that France would position, nuclear heads in all their countries, and so with the idea of developing a sort of tripwire strategy, having the idea that, well, if we position our nuclear capabilities in those countries, like I know third-party countries wanting to invade it or attack it would think twice. It's a revolution in the French psyche, really. That's hard to overstate. Now, the caveats are that
that's the thing I'm supposed to say as the Brit, right?
Yeah, the French are used to revolutions, I guess. But for this one, it truly is like a change of mindset. That this is absolutely true. The caveat is it's probably to rebalance the scale a bit here, but we're not speaking of extended deterrence. We're not speaking necessarily of the effect that the American nuclear umbrella is supposed to have with NATO, because there is no sharing of decision making. There would not be in terms of who decides to, if we reach this situation, if we reach this stage, who would decide to launch a nuclear device and at whom? It would still be entirely in the hands of the French president, as the constitution wants. Yeah, like the positioning of those nuclear heads would not mean that the French are actually sharing their nuclear arsenal, if that makes sense.
No, of course not. But that's why there's a little bit of skepticism about how it would work. There's obviously particularly big concerns about the British one, the reliance of the UK systems on American input, but of course also Scottish independence and the GI-UK gap, if you're familiar with that, between Greenland and Iceland in the North Atlantic, and that whole cornerstone of NATO's broader deterrence. Now, you mentioned NATO as well, and so sort of feeding into this is, do you think we'd need a new thing beyond NATO? Do you think something like NATO minus could work without the United States and Ukraine maybe joins it? But like, how would all of this work from Europe's perspective? Is it going to be done through NATO, or is it time just to find something completely new, which isn't reliant on the input of the United States, because they could always, obstruct it somehow?
So the European Defense Union could technically be a sort of like alternative to NATO, but I need to specify that the two can live next to each other, and actually they would intend to. Like the way the European Defense Union, to use this terminology, has been defining itself would be to be like acting in complement to what NATO is doing in full interoperability. And to sort of like having like ISR systems and decision-making systems that are like speak to each other and are integrated. So I think it's more about like layering this defense and multiplying the coordination tools. There were some talks as well to work with the Canadians, I believe. So at the end of the day, it seems probably a bit messy from outside if you look at the map and you see all this crazy network of alliances and things like this. But in practical terms, it's actually not that complicated. Like even within NATO, you have more like minilateral approaches, to defense. Like we spoke about, so you spoke about the GI-UK gap and the High North. You have close cooperation between the UK and Norway. And all the Scandinavian countries with the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, for instance, and all the things in order to tackle this specific part of the world and its security. So technically speaking, that wouldn't be an issue. I think from the European perspective, it's quite reassuring to not be entirely reliant on NATO, Article 4, Article 5, because it's better to still have it, but also have all the devices that you could use potentially to tackle regional threats. It's kind of like, I think I see it as less controversial than it seems, because at the end of the day, it's what the criticisms that were received from the US by the Europeans are kind of being tackled with this. Is this idea of like Europe should not be a freeloader anymore, should be able to handle its own security and safety and defense. And European countries seems to be saying like, okay, we are going to try to do this. We're going to keep NATO. We are not like, NATO is still there, still working the same way. The treaty articles could be triggered the same way, but we're also going to have other tools at disposal to tackle different kind of threats, which is, to me, I see this as certainly like complexifying the map, but not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a good thing to have redundancies like this. You are muted again.
Yeah, I'm on mute again. No, so what about therefore the undersea cables element to all of this? We've seen the Russians interfering a lot around British waters. This is quite a different style of warfare or interference than, say, on the eastern flank, where it seems to be more in political nature. is Europe ready to defend against Russia's multi-pronged approach to destabilization interference? Because it strikes me like the British are severely hindered. They don't seem to have an effective response of deterrence against the Russians, who, again, this is very grey zone. It's not overtly done. It's just testing the waters, literally testing the waters and trying to see what they can get away with through clandestine means, like the Yantar vessel that's been seen in and around the British Isles. Does Europe have the capabilities to deal with these various forms of threat?
Well, the short answer is probably not enough. Could do better. I would say that the hybrid kind of threats, sub-threshold, it's something that obviously there is an element in NATO strategy and European defense that looks at those things. But at the end of the day, we're speaking about threats that are, as you said, like unidentified ships having suspicious activities in your waters, threatening undersea cables or other kind of critical infrastructures. To tackle those things, I would say, like, well, you need ships, you need personnel, surveillance capabilities, monitoring capabilities, and we do have them, obviously. But I think we might not have enough of them. To take an example, again, that you mentioned a bit earlier, the GI-UK gap. So this, basically, it's the way that Russian Navy ships coming from the high north would take to get into the North Atlantic. So obviously, monitoring is happening, and we are trying to track, who is coming and going. But it's also a part of the world that is potentially exposed to those sub-threshold activities as well. Again, like we mentioned undersea cables being, damaged by mysterious ship activities or things like this. What do you need? You need to have patrol ships, like in the high sea. You need to have numbers. You need to have systems and platforms ready. And I think plainly speaking, I think we don't have enough. I think a country like the UK, if you look at the fleet of the Royal Navy, is the smallest fleet number in like generations. I think we have, like, in terms of hulls, concretely, you can only do as much. I'm coming back to what I said earlier about strategic alignment and prioritization. It is hard when you have only 2,000 ships and you aspire to play a role in the Indo-Pacific, in the Antarctic, in the Atlantic, and elsewhere, to also monitor your own waters, properly, and be at the ready if something was needed. If you needed to send an helicopter or like a patrol ship or something like this, I would say, like, if we combine the low numbers with the lack of readiness and the increased pressure that we feel from Russia in terms of, again, hybrid threats and testing the limits, testing the waters, as you said, yeah, we're in a situation that is not optimal. I think more could be done. And to be clear, investments are being made, but we are probably not fully in the mindset of being like, okay, this is a part of the world we really need to cover, for potential, like, okay, high intensity warfare activities, anti-submarine warfare potentially, but also lower level, sub-threshold monitoring, ability to react, for those against those kind of threats, essentially.
Absolutely. No, I think that the Russians are quite savvy finding ways to apply new pressure in different ways. They do quite a lot with not very much. At least a lot of people fear that they're able to do all sorts of things in all parts of Europe, which for a single nation state is quite impressive. Now, there's obviously this argument about that they will invade all of Europe and somehow take it all over, despite them being unable to force the capitulation of Ukraine. So where do you see this going in the next sort of 3-4 months over the summer? Are the Europeans ready for a potential actual I don't know, combat with the Russians, regardless of what that may look like? I don't think it's going to be kinetic warfare, Russian troops landing in the Baltics or invading sort of Denmark, right? Or do you think we could actually see some kind of conventional operation and conflict?
Well, I think we're going to see more of the same within the time frame you just defined. I think we're going to still see pressure again with those kind of hybrid threats, cyber attacks, like sort of like pressure points on critical infrastructure, things, strategy like communication strategy to destabilize our societies, and things like this. So I don't think it's so much about preparing for a high intensity, high scale warfare. I think countries should keep preparing for this. Like if you want peace, prepare for war. And this is what we're going to see, especially in the eastern part of Europe. So Poland, the Baltics, and this is going to keep going. But I don't see any significant change. It doesn't mean that nothing should be done for the rest. Like cyber defense, patrol ships, things like this should be at the forefront of the investments that we see in countries like Norway, the UK, France, Germany. So
simply then, Nicholas, should we be pessimistic, optimistic, realistic, insistic? How many cystics can I find there? There's a joke. What should
I'm not very optimistic in terms of the ability of those countries to on their own rebuild significant capabilities that will be like momentous. I try to be a bit more optimistic in terms of their ability to coordinate and find like common ground, especially if the security environment stay the same or degrade. It will probably push politicians, political leaders to make harder choices at this level and potentially refocus their efforts in a more coordinated way in terms of defense acquisition and strategic objectives.
Well, that is quite a first, isn't it, Nicholas? Where Brit's more optimistic for once, and I'm usually positive about the weather, then maybe there'll be something else. But Nicholas, Juan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining the show, everyone, for watching. Nicholas Juan of the RAND Corporation. Do check out some of his writings. Some stuff will be in the description below. And do subscribe if you like the content, and we'll see you all very soon. But take care. Ciao.
Thank you very much. Bye.